attempted to address the concerns of what veterans need. One of the things that, in my own experience, um, when I was wounded in Vietnam, if it were not for the medical personnel and the helicopter pilots that came in and got me, um, they did a magnificent job. I'll stand up and praise them. They came in under fire to get myself and others, and then the medical personnel in Vietnam. Incidentally, I had the opportunity to converse with the nurse that helped take care of me at a hospital at the 24th of Vac Hospital in Vietnam. But they did a wonderful job putting my body back together. But if I did not have support from family and from church and friends, you could literally have gone off, always thinking about your experience in Vietnam. Because I'm gonna tell you, once you experience something like that, you never forget it. And something, they talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome, that kind of thing. But you can smell. Anytime I go to the airport and smell the jet fuel, it makes me think about, and I think about the helicopters, because that's the kind of fuel they use. And that triggers, you go back. Or you hear a helicopter with a certain sound, you go back. And so anything can trigger that kind of feeling. So veterans have to be, the nation can't afford to forget its veterans. If you've been asked to go into the military, or you volunteer and you suffer through particular activities or incidents, the government has to now ante up and make sure that you're taken care of on a physical level, but also on a mental and spiritual level. One of the things that they're having a problem with is that veterans are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They survive that, and then they take their own lives. Months later, something's wrong. So that tells me that we're not addressing the situation. And then on the other note is now with females going through the same thing. So it's enough studies and intelligence out there for us to understand we have to do more for the veterans.
All right. When you came back from Vietnam, you said there was a cultural change, like from the movement from more formal to like less formal.
Yes.
What do you think could have accounted for these cultural changes? Like what accounted for the hippie movement and all the other movements that took place during that time?
Well, part of it was, I would have to say, the music. Part was the civil rights movement, the war movement. Young people began to, on college campuses, began to realize that we got to say something about that, about what's happening in our culture. In 1970, Kent State took place, where students were protesting, and some were killed. And there were National Guard troops on a campus in a state of the United States of America with bayonets and live rounds, and they were fired on. Okay, so with that, the music and Hell No, I Won't Go, all of that contributed to the breakdown and basic traditions of our nation. World War II veterans didn't like the protesters. War was going on. They say, we need to fight for our nation, and you need to go. You need to stand up and support that. But it was a different kind of war, and those things, I believe, contributed. Many factors contributed to the fact that folks didn't want to accept what was happening, and the culture things began to ease down. We also had the assassination of Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King. You know, that changed people to saying, hey, we're going off here. So it was many factors like that, I think, that helped to begin to show people we don't have to be straight-laced like we have been.
The economy recovered in the early 1980s and built upon the latest progress at that time.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think contributed to the recovery of the economy?
I think perhaps the better management, fiscal management, from some of our leaders, and it would be interesting to trace back, who was responsible for some of that improved fiscal management. But the fact that we had to stop spending and realize what we spend for today, we have to pay for today. Our government, city, state, and national, have this concept of spend it today, pay for it tomorrow. That's what the whole concept of credit cards are about. You don't have the money, but you put it on the credit card. That's what got us in trouble. So it was better fiscal management and during that time to help get us out of that syndrome of having to go to the federal government for bailouts. We're calling them bailouts now. Some simple little things like when mayors began to look at the social welfare system. When people just go and fleece the system. Late last year, they were talking about the Long Island Railroad, whereby almost 90% of the employees that were retiring were receiving workers' compensation and disability. How in the world is that possible? 90% of the people that retired. So that tells you something. Again, I say greed, 90%. And so there are doctors who were involved, administrators, and the workers themselves. So these are the kinds of things that have gotten us in trouble. And when somebody wants something for nothing, that's what gets us in trouble.
Ed Koch was the mayor during the recovery period. Do you remember any specific changes put in effect by his administration that contributed to the recovery?
I remember, when you talk about Mayor Koch, I remember his thing was he always attempted to assess whatever programs he had, go to the people, and his thing was, how am I doing? In other words, self-assessment. And I can't say a particular program, but I do know he always attempted to assess where he was and putting forth a particular program. And that's what I think about when you say Ed Koch. He would always say, how am I doing? And sometimes he may not have been ready for the answer, because the folks would lash into him, well, you ain't doing too hot with this one. All right, but on other venues, he was doing pretty good. So that's what I recall about him. Okay.
What do you think contributed to the recovery of the economy
When?
during like the early 80s? When it
Okay.
was coming back up.